So anyway, we're gonna have just an informal conversation, and I was inspired to talk about this and kind of expand the area of discussion because of the it just okay. So let's just start with introduction. I'm Pauline Dugot. I am a creativity coach. I work with artists, and I'm also an artist myself. And so I have a lot of creative ideas and expansive ideas all the time, and I like to research. And Marian, what do you do? What is your area of focus?
So my area of focus is I work with clients. I have a practice that I do. I would say full time, and then creativity, art. Art is really important to me. Working on the art pieces that I work on, and then yoga actually. So those are my focuses. I feel like yeah, creativity, fulfilling my really fulfilling myself, I guess, in a sense, like really feeling fulfilled, So art does that a lot for me, and then working with clients, doing whether it's the crystalline soul healing or the biofield tuning. So those are kind of my areas that I focus on a lot more.
Yeah, and because we're both artists and because we're both in kind of that area of the healing modalities and the coaching modalities, I think it comes kind of second nature that we delve into these interesting categories. And the subject matter that I want to broach today is about extraterrestrials. It's this big, it's almost like a big elephant in the room that it's coming out more and more. And I personally can't ignore it anymore because first of all, I love the subject so much. I never really had experiences myself, but I love the concept that we're not only ones in the universe. I love the concept that I hear that there are other beings that are trying to help us here, people on Earth, trying to help humanity navigate this shitstorm of where we are right now. And I keep thinking back to that TV show that used to be in 2004-5, Stargate SG-1. You might remember it.
Mm-hmm.
I remember those scenes when they opened the gate and they invited other beings and interacted and collaborated with them, and they kept going back and forth. And it was just so interesting. And that was 20 years ago. And now we keep hearing more stories like that. And so I think that is a very interesting subject. And it's interesting for me to know where you kind of came about getting involved and hearing about it. And what is it like for you now?
So I would say I've always felt like there's definitely more, there had to be more than just us. I never, even as a kid, I knew that there had to be more. And I held on to that idea and that magic because I had seen and felt things when I was little. And I think as I was always kind of, as what was that one show with David Duchovny on it, the one,
X-Files.
The X-Files, and so I was really fascinated with that, unsolved mysteries, the ghost shows, like all those things. And um, I felt like, if those things are out there, like on, TV or shows are being created, and it has to be somewhere, because where do ideas come from? And so I started, wondering that, like as a child, if someone thinks it up, it has to be real somewhere, And I like the idea that we're not the only ones. I feel like that's very, we can't, I don't know, we just can't be. We just can't be the only ones. So my fascination with it has been, for a very long time. And um, I have had these encounters that I have a hard time sometimes putting into words, but I've had encounters. I've seen things moving in the sky. I'm an experiencer. I wouldn't say I've been necessarily abducted, but I have been taken on ships before, into it's not the dream state. It's some other state. I wouldn't even call it astral travel. I would almost call it bilocating. I have seen things in that space that I couldn't even comprehend, to the point where my brain couldn't even make sense of what I was seeing. And it would cause a lot of fear because my brain was trying to, it's one thing to see it on a show and in Hollywood, and it's another thing to see it in person. And of course, you have these experiences and people, think that you're either off your rocker or that you're on drugs. And I'm not on drugs or hallucinogens or any of those things when I'm having these experiences. So I've had too many of my own experiences to think that we are the only ones. So it's one of those, like, but how do you get other people to believe when you have these experiences? And the only thing I can, do is speak from authenticity, and speak from experience and just share what it is, and then, take what you want from it, kind of thing. So yeah, from my experiences, we definitely, humans are not the only ones walking around. There's way more than that. And I have seen some stuff even walking on our planet where I'm like, hold on a minute. What? And then you just look at what we even have here. I mean, some of these creatures that we have here that do walk around, I mean, it's just amazing stuff. I mean, where did it all come from? That's the thing, is it had to come from somewhere, outside, and was seeded here. That to me feels more aligned, that we ourselves are terrestrial as
Yeah,
well. I mean,
exactly. And then you have movies like Star Wars, like there's just giant number of movies that is written about that. And nobody questions that. But I find that it's very important for people to have this positive aspect and positive viewpoint, because throughout the years, there have been a lot of movies made that are negative or representing the extraterrestrials in a negative light. Well, what if they are future travelers, future descendants of ourselves coming back, and we are negatively predisposed to them? I think that is important for people to realize that there's multiple variations. And likely most of them are better than what we see them as. I just find this subject very exciting, and there's more and more people talking about it. And so if there are people that are talking about it, there's got to be coming up to light, and we have to look at it more often. It's just so fascinating to me.
I feel that when it started coming out in movies and stuff, like it brings back to that, I think it was back in the 50s, War of the Worlds, when the guy who wrote that story, when he did the radio broadcast, right, and everybody thought it was real, and people started flipping out about it. And I think it was kind of a test to see like what would happen, if we were invaded or whatever. And I think that slowly but surely, because I think our government started working with extraterrestrials, which has come out, but a lot of people aren't paying attention. But, I think they kind of wanted to see how the public would react, right? And I think in what it feels like is that they wanted to create a narrative, right? A fear-based narrative. Uh, and you've kind of seen that throughout the media. Like there's always, we're going to be attacked. We're going to be, this, that, and the other. And so the media definitely paints it one way. And then, and then movies will paint it another way. And it wasn't until recently that we've actually had some positive. I think E.T. was actually the first positive type movie that we ever had about an extraterrestrial, when we were kids, but um, I feel like you can't rip off the blinders and just be like, here we are. You kind of have to slowly, because of the type of the way we've evolved as a species. I feel like it has to kind of come off slowly, right? But there's even references to other beings coming here and giving, people things and helping them. I mean, in old texts, in my research in ancient languages, I have found books from like the 17th century, talking about these beings coming from the Pleiades. And it even is talked about in the Mayan culture, and even in Aboriginal cultures as well. So it's the fact that we've been being visited has been talked about for a long time, but I feel like somehow in there was a narrative that needed to be followed, I guess, or painted. And this negative idea got implanted here, because other cultures didn't see it as a negative thing. But I think when those beings came here, they were worshipped as gods. And I feel like some of those beings relished in that, and then other beings were like, no, 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 we're just trying to help you. So I mean, I think it can go either way. I think it's, they can be good, or they can, I wouldn't even say bad, but they might have other intentions. So
Yeah,
yeah.
and I actually think that that ET movie, it was the first positive, but it was also weird. It was very weird representation. Like, my goodness, it's so unrelatable that might be not negatively predisposed, but it was just placed in such a weird position that I don't know if any entity would be okay with being represented like that. But at least there was a step forward. Maybe it was a step forward. Maybe it was a step sideways. I'm not sure. But there was the movie Avatar. I think was like the one that actually represented the possibility of life in another planet, and the possibility of different life being still very valuable, still very well predisposed. And I love that representation of those types of beings. And another thing that you mentioned about the ancient texts, yes, we have a lot of references, but somehow there is a difference between, or at least in my perception, it was originally the difference between the angelic beings coming here and guiding, or some kind of gods or entities coming in energetic form, and that was okay. But when we're talking about actual beings materializing or coming in some kind of high technological vessels, that for some reason for me was a completely different territory, and it did not match up. So the angelic beings are fine, they're all energy, but if it's a technology, then it's very questionable, very, we don't know what to deal with that. So there was this discrepancy. And only in the recent kind of years, I kind of started merging the two and finding the cohesion between that.
Yeah. There actually, now that just really what I remembered is there was actually a movie before ET, I think, and it was in the 80s, and I think Richard Dreyfuss was in it, and he was communicating with these beings with sound frequency, and it was I think it was in the early 80s. So, and that movie actually was about a group of beings coming here, and they tried to attack them. I think, I forget what it was called. Um, and he ended up finding a way of communicating with them, and then in the end ends up going on the ship off with them. So there was one other movie before ET, but
Oh, the Flight of the Navigator in the
th
90s
that's
was
another
my
one.
favorite. That was so
Yeah,
awesome. That was
yeah,
actually collaboration. There was a boy who came on the ship and he did something. I love that movie. That was
yeah,
awesome.
yeah. So yeah, I feel like that with kind of with the, with the representation of, the angelic beings versus, these other beings, I think that what people saw, I think they were actual beings. I think that if you've never seen anything like that before, it'd be like, going from here and going back then and showing them a cell phone. How would they describe it? It's, so I feel like, the angelic beings, or even some of the Egyptian gods or whatever, I feel like at that time that's how they knew how to describe what they were seeing. I feel like that they were always kind of these. I mean, there are obviously, some beings that are more of light and geometric shapes because of the way that they're moving through, like, you just their physical form and the way that they're moving. So I think the wings of angels were probably not actual wings, but they didn't know how else to describe these things, like the chariots of fire and, things like that, because how else would they describe a burning ship, or a ship that's coming into our atmosphere? You know what I mean? So I think that it's the only way they knew how to describe it. And I would imagine that, when Moses went up on the mount, right, and he came back down with white hair, um, I wonder because when he came into contact with these higher beings, so there's this whole thing about like, when someone gets scared enough, their hair will turn white, or being exposed to radiation will do the same thing as well, which would kind of
Yes.
fit the whole, if he went up on the mount and came into contact with a ship and wasn't, and there was radiation coming off this damn thing, like, maybe that's what turned his hair white, like, who knows? And maybe that's why he kind of, came down and kind of had that wide-eyed look and, was totally flipped out on one hand, but also kind of, there's this thing that you go into like that shock of when you've come into contact, with something you've never seen before. So I kind of feel like, these beings have been coming here, and they're not necessarily have always been what we would consider angelic or angels, but that's what we would give that. Like if we were to put ourselves back in those times, like how else would you describe a flying thing? Oh, it must be, an angel. But who knows too, because, all those texts have been rewritten and interpreted in so many different languages that, what it was originally written in, who knows? And a lot of it was also written from visions too, from these prophets, right? So a lot of these people were, tripping on whatever and, having these visions and going to these places, and they were, traveling in the astral, and and probably seeing parts of the future as well, since all time is happening all at the same time. They were able to travel to these various different places. So yeah, it's I mean, we really don't know. I mean, like, really, we don't know. We can only go by what we're reading or by kind of what we're told, or even in our own channelings. How do we really know, like, if that's not to say that channeling isn't, what you're channeling or bringing through isn't real, but like, there's so many different filters that comes through, and so many different lenses of perceptions. It's going to be hard to pin down, like, that's why there is no truth, as they say, because there is truth in all things on some levels. So yeah, it would be, I can't wait to get that answer, because I know that if I'm asking these questions while I'm here in this body, I know that when I go wherever I go after not being here, that that those questions will be answered.
Yeah, exactly. There's so much variety. And I think it's important to start talking about, so we can add a lot more vocabulary to a lot more words to our vocabulary to describe this. And
Yeah.
there's a book by Dolores Cannon that describes, it's called Legend of the Star Crash. And going back to the concept of radiation, the beings who came and the ship malfunctioned, the native people didn't know how to really relate to the technology like that just being dropped in their backyard. And those beings came from elsewhere where they were not used to the same radiation of the sun. And so all of a sudden they perceived differently by the locals, and then all kinds of legends and stories come up because of that, and the healing abilities and technologies that they had. So all of that, and then you have word of mouth that you try to translate something that you have no concept or conceptual understanding of, and it all becomes convoluted. And I think that's why it's so important now to share the ideas, share the stories, talk about that, so we can at least get to the bottom of some portion, because there are layers. There are layers to that. There's a lot of complexity because we're in a galaxy that is very complex. But the more people are speaking, the more they're writing, the more we can have a glimpse of a different perspective. So we can add a little different facets to that diamond through which we perceive the reality. And I think that's fascinating.
Yeah. I also know that, just from my own feeling into a lot of this, and that, you know, they're not going to come down here and save us. That's not the whole point of all of this. They can assist us through various means, Um, the whole idea of Star Trek was that, when they were traveling around, that they were not to interfere, right? They could
Yep.
they could assist
Directive.
when, yeah, that was the prime directive, right? So, and Gene Roddenberry supposedly had, his thumb on the pulse of all of that stuff. He supposedly was at the round table, so to speak, and was able to look through what they call the looking glass, and that in itself is a, you know, I don't know if it's actual physical glass, but it's this, you know, this, you know, able to look at, see things that we don't get to know about here necessarily, kind of this secret peek into what's really out there, right? Or I don't necessarily know everything about that entire project, but it is very interesting if you just think about the looking glass, like in Alice in Wonderland, looking through the looking glass. It's like seeing the things that you don't get to see. And so when he wrote that whole series, and even if you go back and watch the older episodes, and even if you watch even the ones that, you know, came after that, it's like you can see the like why, like during times when they did supposedly come here, right, these other beings, because I've you know, read various books about it, that it did interfere, and that's why they kind of had to back off. And then also, you know, humans, whether anybody wants to admit it or not, we are kind of a violent race. I mean, we are kind of this warrior race. And you know, if they were to come down here now, who's to say that people wouldn't kill them and assassinate them, or in an attempt to, because they feel like they're everything's going to be threatened. So I wouldn't want to come down here either, knowing how volatile things can get. And when we get confused and we get scared, we do things that we wouldn't normally do, you know. So it's like I don't blame them for not wanting to fully, you know, come down here and you know, intervene and walk around all the time, you know. But also it wouldn't be, you know, the whole point I feel of being here is to have this journey, right? Is to just experience stuff. And we wouldn't be able to experience or go through the things collectively or evolve or grow if we had somebody fixing. It's like a mom, like a helicopter mom. How are you, a sheltered kid, how are you supposed to grow and do anything if someone's constantly doing it all for you? You'll never expand. We wouldn't grow. So I mean, I get it. Times are really rough right now, and people want that. They want that savior, you know. And but look, we supposedly we had a savior, right? And look what they did to
Yeah.
him, right? Like whether that's a true story or not, somewhere that story really is true and does exist on some level, right? It may not be the exact, you know, thing that's been written down in the great text of the Bible, but like, you know, on you know, we hang people, we nail people to crosses here. I mean, like
We
it's
hanged witches for generations. Like there's
yeah,
that. And
for
considering,
simple
yes, the prime directive of not interference, but there's this new concept that is emerged recently of the star seeds. And that, I believe, is the only way they can interfere is by inside job.
yep, I was gonna say
Incarnate,
that's an inside job.
forget everything, like sign up for this job, you wipe yourself, like you remember nothing about who you are, you come in
Yeah.
here as a clean slate, and then you figure it out just like the rest of them, just like the rest of humanity. And then it's like becomes an experiment. Well, what are you going to make out of it? Well, and so I think that is kind of the why people are talking about it more and more, because they are waking up to the possibility that they might be doing a job in order to uplift the humanity, in order to help in some way, some form or shape, by being part of the humanity, experiencing that whole thing, being in the soup, humanity
Yeah.
soup.
Well, being seated down here, you know, too, it's so I've come across some that I have definitely felt have not had many Earth lifetimes. And you know, and they you know, it's very hard for them to be here because of, you know, I don't know if it's just, you know, they don't have the same experience, right, as some of us that have had, you know, several or more dozens, if not thousands of Earth lifetimes, you know. And so they got dropped down here on supposedly, you know, theorized on a volunteer mission, right? Because in the books that Dolores Cannon wrote, it was the atomic bomb, because we
Yeah.
almost destroyed our entire planet. And we are kind of wet, even though we're supposedly at the very tail end of the Milky Way, which actually they're
Yeah.
now even discovering, they're actually discovering that we may not have even been a part of the Milky Way. We were a part of something else, but we kind of have merged with the Milky Way. So here we are in this little tiny corner, supposedly, quarantined over here or whatever. But that would have, rippled through the entire universe and universes, because there's more than just our universe. And it would have caused this really bad ripple effect. And so it was, okay, we can't allow that to happen. And so, because, we got a little too big for our britches. And
Yeah.
so then that's when that project, started, was, was more of an inside job. And, I mean, just in that in itself, whether that is a real thing or not, it's very exciting to explore, and to think about that, these newer souls are coming here to help raise the frequency and help wake up the rest of humanity. I mean, our parents are kind of were, the flower children, right? And so that was kind of the first
Hmm.
wave, the hippie movement, and the LSD, and all those things, and like Alan Watts, and Ram Dass, and like all these guys,
Yeah.
came in, and it's our parents. My mom actually had a UFO experience when she was a child. She didn't tell me that until a couple of years ago, and so I always wondered, like from her experience with that, like it's interesting because I'm like, and I'm so interested in all of this stuff. I wonder, I don't know, am I, did the alien mom and dad come down here and be like, that will carry our child, like I don't know,
I
like who
know.
knows, but it's kind of fun to think about, in a way. But yeah, I feel that, you know, some have a stronger mission than others to really help and assist and to raise the frequency here. So, and some of these kids, man, they do look like they got the big eyes, they got the I
Hmm.
don't know, the structure of I mean, they look like otherworldly. And I think it's and a lot of the Gen Zers and even the generation before that are really into this androgyny and fluidity, and which is very supposedly very similar to other ET races, where they don't
Yeah.
necessarily have genders and they are very fluid, especially with the Greys. The Greys are big
Yeah.
on that. And I've come across some beings myself where they could be either or, and they kind of carry both of those energies evenly, so it's really hard to tell what they are. But I mean, you can definitely see, I mean, we are changing, we are evolving, and it started, I think, like way back, with that first wave. And then some of us, I think we're like the second wave, and then there's the ones that are after us, I think the third wave. So it'll be interesting to see, even in the
Yeah.
next 20 years, what's
Oh,
going to
for
happen,
sure. For sure. Well, in the 60s, it's almost like that was the first expression of um, or a concept of love being brought forth, and talked about constantly as a solution to everything. Which now
Yeah.
we're talking more and more about it. How the frequency of love not only does it calibrates really high in levels of frequency, but it is the solution, the compassion, the empathy and the forgiveness. All of those qualities at the part of love. It is the transcendent quality that carries us forward. And I think that this whole movement of yes, it's so funny how we think we're alone in universe and we're so insignificant, but yet we carry such a potential that could have had effects throughout the galaxy. Like we really have no idea how much potential we have. And even more so, we have more potential if we express it through love and through creativity. And that's why I think that that's how the art and the artists tie into this whole systems. And I'm big about art, and I know you're big about art. And for me, the art represents the doorway into the new level of consciousness, doorway into the next step of evolution. The more art we do, the better we become.
Yeah, well, because the art, creativity, I mean, when you're doing art, you're actually accessing both sides of your brain. I mean, you're doing left and right brain steps. You're bringing those parts of you into sync. And it really, when you're expressing, art, whether it be in painting, drawing, sculpting, you know, even dancing, singing, you're accessing your imagination. And the imagination is key, I think, in a lot of all of this, you know, imagination is key. And it's also is an inner child thing. So as adults, you know, like, so as children getting into art, if, you know, and now kids are being, you know, nurtured more to stay in the arts, you know, but isn't it interesting how a lot of school programs started to cut? I remember, especially when my senior year in high school, they cut all the advanced art programs. This advanced singing program, the advanced art program, and the advanced music program. And that's when, and that was in 1996. So they started cutting all of those programs. And but I feel like, you know, if we could continue to nurture the children and to stay in that creativity, that allows them to stay in that imagination and that magic of being a kid, you know. But like, I mean, you're still obviously growing, but you're still tapping into that magic, because there's this thing that happens when you're so, you have this clean slate, you know, when you're born, and until, like, according to certain like Vedic texts and stuff like that, like the karma doesn't set in until you're like 6 or 7 years old. It just depends on what tradition that you're following in those Eastern practices, but they kind of all kind of say the same thing, that, you know, up until that age, everything's kind of this, you know, clear, you know, whatever. You don't even begin to technically take on your parents' karmic stuff or conditioning or programming until that time, kind of, sort of, I think. So that's why, as adults, tapping into that creativity is us reconnecting and establishing a relationship with the inner child. And when you're an adult, because you know more than you did when you were a kid, I feel like you can really create more alchemy, right? You can create more, just a much stronger intention, you know. So I think that it's absolutely important to stay creative and to stay in that artistic flow for as long as you can. And, you know, people, oh, I'm not a good artist, or I'm not a this, I'm not a, everybody has it within them. Everybody, everybody,
Yeah.
you know. It's just whether or not you want to practice. I had to practice drawing, you had to practice drawing. I used to dance, I had to practice dance, I had to practice, you know, music, whatever. I mean, it's like, you know, you just got to keep going with it. Or some kids are just not nurtured that way, and thankfully I was nurtured that way and allowed to really express myself in that creativity. So
Yeah, and I think the inner child is actually the part of us that allows us to remember our deeper meanings, deeper connections, and allows us to connect to that part of ourselves that might have come here for the bigger mission. But it only can be done through creativity. You can't do it through logic. You have to drop down into your heart, integrate all the shadows kind of in yourself, and then see through all of that. And it's so important, I think, to have ability. It's been said that we're kind of done with karma right now. As of now, we are transcending out of those karma cycles. I'm not sure how relevant it is, but maybe, possibly. And if we are, then we have twice as much responsibility to create the new future with a lot less care for, like, if before we were afraid to do something in terms of not incurring karma. Now, if the karma is done, if we're done with previous karmas, then we have like the new slate that we can create on and move much further in terms of reintegrating the inner child and all of those aspects of ourselves. That is just so important. And yes, correct about everybody. What, imagine if every single human on earth has the potential to be an artist. They are born with artists within them, like every single person. If you have a head and two arms and two legs, you are an artist. Imagine if everybody just connected with that part of themselves and just said, well, okay, I could be artist of some kind. And what would the world look like then? You know?
oh, it would be, oh my gosh, I mean, it would definitely not be this current paradigm. um but then again, you know, we, you know, it might not be as exciting either, you know, if everything was so blissful all the time, who knows? I mean, if we were already, I mean, into the, you know, if everyone was into the fifth dimension, you know, as they say, because that's the you know, the place where, you know, the bliss exists, you know, it's like
Yeah.
it's watching that show The Good Place, you know, the one of the last season is where they're all in, you know, in the good place, and you know, it's just blissful all the time, and they all get really bored, you know, and they and even the ones that have been up there forever, they're like, oh my gosh, every day it's just bliss, you know, and it's like that's when they decided, you know, well, I don't want to be here. I want to, you know, incarnate, or
Yeah.
I want to go be, you know, whatever, go back into the mix, you know. So, but it would be a completely different world if everyone actually could tap into that potential.
Yeah, no, definitely. The total bliss would be detrimental. It's been explored already in 1999 in the movie Matrix, how they said the first version was the ideal world and everybody rejected it. How there's a new movie called Upload where everything is joyful and they are not fitting or not working well. There has to be a polarity. That is, this is the world of polarity. There has to be good and bad. There has to be dark and white, masculine, feminine. Without that, there is no way. But if we just added the art to the mix of this good and bad, dark and light, to find more creative solutions, not taking away the challenges, but finding creative solutions to resolve those challenges, I
Yeah.
think that would be, if, because right now the whole world is relying on their logic and on their mind to solve everything. It's difficult, even for me as an artist, it's difficult for me to solve the problems with the heart, solve the problems with intuition. It doesn't come naturally. We want to do something in order to produce the emotion. We want to do something in the physical world in order to produce the feeling. And it's other way around. We need to feel first and then the outside world responds. But if we had more ability to see that in creative terms, how could we see this transition to feeling first creatively and then seeing the changes in the environment?
Yeah, I think that solving problems through creativity would be, you know, that would be ideal, you know, rather than the way that, you know, we tend to solve problems, which is which is where we, you know, logically try to explain everything through logic. Um, and that's just like something I feel like some people are born more logical than others. You know, I've definitely have some friends that are way more logical. And then I have some friends that are way on the like beyond, even beyond me. I'm like, whoa, life's a trip for you, you know, constantly, you know. But being able to come into that balance would be perfect, you know, like if we could still have all the things happen, but still use, you know, creativity to help solve the things that, you know, that come into play. And, you know, it's very comforting to think, you know, that that is a possibility. So even if it's not happening for everyone, you know, I take, is that solace in the fact that like at least some of us are on that, you know, and if we are really all connected, that we're all, you know, that somewhere in there that is happening on a certain level, whether it's, you know, really apparent in someone's life, or if it's just an undercurrent of energy going on in there. And you know, so I'd like to think that us creatives, us artists, you know, as those of us that have stepped into that, you know, and do solve, you know, those issues through creativity, that somewhere in there what we're doing is, you know, we are not only assisting ourselves but others. So I kind of take, you know, some peace in that too, that you know, that maybe somewhere in there, you know, we are kind of supplying that to the collective. So,
Yeah, it's kind of like bringing practicality to this world, but mixing it with creativity. So creative practicality or practical creativity or something like that. And I know that there's a really good book that David Hawkins wrote a while ago called Power versus Force. And he describes there how we use force in a lot of situations to resolve the problems. And the force has a lot of emotions and feelings that are of the low, very low vibration, and we have to learn to solve the problems from the power stage, from the neutrality, from the awareness, the enlightenment and love, all those feelings. And that is where the creativity aids us. If we can do that, if we can shift out of force into power with our creativity and show others that it's possible, we might be able to influence others to take inspiration from that and
Is that
do
the
what they can.
is that Hawkins? Is that the guy that did the Hawkins scale? Is that who you're talking about?
Yeah, it's a scale of consciousness from 0 to 1,000.
Yes, I read this. Okay, so it's interesting that you even said that, because that's a synchronicity for me, because I've been watching this guy's YouTube, and he shows these clips um, from these talks that Hawkins gave, and I was like, what? Like, he does these talks on consciousness
Yeah,
and beingness, and how to get out of thoughts, and that how our consciousness is who we are, but our thoughts are not. It's great stuff. So I love that you're even mentioning that, because I thought about getting, like, which book should I get by this guy, because he seems so cool, but yeah, I like that scale of consciousness, and then he lists all those things of, like, where you're at and what kind of, what the level of vibration that you're at. And I think creativity was on the higher scale of frequency, I believe.
it's not really a level in his kind of creativity is not the emotion or a feeling, but it does obviously fits in one of those categories. It goes from anger, guilt, apathy, anger, pride, courage, and then neutrality, willingness, acceptance. I'm looking at the map on my wall: acceptance, knowledge, love, and joy, and peace, and enlightenment. So that's how it goes. And creativity is just born out of expressing those, out of expressing neutrality, out of expressing willingness to face the situations, out of expressing understanding with. So, like, the understanding part, it goes after neutrality. After we become neutral and stop reacting, then we can understand what is happening, and then we can express unconditional love towards the subject matter. And out of that is born like creativity. So the force is destructive emotions and destructive consciousness, everything below 200, and everything above it is creativity and creation. So 200 and above is creation, 200 below is destruction. And I see it like an ocean, and with the surface of the ocean is 200, and below everything is heavy and dark and murky and depressing, but everything above is light and airy and expansive and yeah, amazing. I always, and we never stay in one category. We always moving up and down, but we can consciously decide where to spend most of our time in. We can consciously choose to be more in neutrality or more in forgiveness and awareness and unconditional love and all of that, instead of being in anger and apathy and guilt and shame and all of those depressing, really heavy emotions.
I feel like there is some beauty, though, in feeling our emotions the way we do. In my experiences with communicating and seeing and meeting other beings in these other spaces, it's the one thing that comes across to me, is that they find it. That's why, they watch us, right? Because we have this ability to go from 0 to 60, and because we have that range of emotion, and we have that kind of going up and down that scale. Even our fields, our org field, constantly change, right? We're like a mood ring, like, and our colors, because they can see a lot, not all of them, but some of them can see, our light, and can see our colors changing when we're in these various different, like, stages of whether it's happiness or grief or depression, or and I think that, because we have that ability to kind of really go, like, go from one into the other in a matter of seconds. I think that's why, they sit back and they observe, because there are some races that actually bred and programmed emotions out of their whole line, because they were trying to come to the point of being too logical. And so, um, in an effort to try to get it back, they started watching us, right? And they wanted to see how we could grow and progress. And and when I went up on the ship, um, it was a couple years ago, and I was so flipped out because here I was, I'm like not in my room anymore. I'm up against the wall and I won't get off the wall because I literally physically couldn't, because it was so overwhelming, to see the earth from this point of view. I'd never seen it from that. I'm not an astronaut. I didn't know, what it looks like until I was actually up there. And and this being, and masculine, really tall kind of being, is how, like, telling me, like, and not with words, but in these frequencies and these emotions, that it's okay, you'll be safe. But when I was up there, I was shown that, um, they have all these rooms, like almost like observatories, where they observe us, and it's like walking into like like a house with, like, 24 different fucking TV screens with all this stuff like up there, right? And they watch everything. And but in order for them to be able to watch what's happening, the certain groups that are watching different things can't have the range of emotion, because they our emotions are so powerful. So they actually, when they observe, the ones that observe have to be, almost, no empathy, in a sense. No, I know that sounds really weird, but they can't have that range of emotion depending on what it is that they're observing. Most of them that I saw observing different things definitely have a tighter control of their emotions, but they, watch us in an effort to kind of keep track, but also because we are fascinating with how we can go from one end to the other, and how, to them, it's like they took some of them, not all of them, but some of them took that away. So, you know, we are, I think I can appreciate the ups and downs. I would just, I just would like to get them through them quicker,
Yeah, I
and not
know.
have it, not struggle so much, and I really, from the people that struggle with, can't get themselves out of those cycles, like, you know, um, that's a really hard place to stay, and I, hope that, those people can, at least see the light at the end of the tunnel somewhere, and some don't make it, um, past that. They can't handle what's here. And that's, you know, I mean, there is definitely, when you go to these other places, the heaviness doesn't exist there. And now I know why people don't want to be here, and why they want to stay in these other places. And then why, when people talk about, New Earth and all this other stuff, they don't want to be here, because it sounds so much easier and so much more blissful than the current state that they're in. So that's just something to kind of think about too.
Yeah, exactly. And I believe that that race that stopped feeling emotions also stopped procreating because of that, and they had significant challenges with continuation of their race because they took that out, and then they started trying to rebuild that. But from what I read, the two main aspects that attracts the beings to this planet is the physical limitation and how hard it is to manifest anything, the limitation in all kinds of ways, and the other one is the emotion. Those two things is what is just the most unique situation in the galaxy, according to the some of the books and writings, and it doesn't exist anywhere else. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, you want to know what's interesting is I recently heard a talk, a couple different talks actually, about how, different races, different groups of ETs, how, we think they know everything. It's really interesting how, we put certain beings up on a pedestal, right? Because we think they know everything. It's like what we do here to gurus or to masters or whatever. I mean, the very thing that we do to each other here is also, the very thing that we've done to, these other races, right? We think that they know more than we do. We think that they are the end all be all. But it turns out that a lot of them, they are trying to figure out who, what source is. Like some of these beings are, thousands, millions of years old, but their whole line has existed beyond that. But even them, they don't even know what happened, 1 billion years ago necessarily. All that's been passed down through, handed down, just like the game of telephone, just like our history is here. So our what we have here actually is very much like, it mimics like what goes on with these other races. There isn't one all be all race. There's many of them, and they all have the same quest that we do, in a sense, like, who is, source or God, and I found it really, through the whole talk, I was like, it kind of brought these other like beings, like kind of down to, for me, down to this level where I was seeing like, oh, they're not anything, they're not better or less, they're just like us. Like, sure, yeah, they probably are a little bit more expanded in certain ways, but they are learning just like we are. And people tend to put them up on these pedestals. Now some of those beings enjoy that pedestal and they want to be there, and that is, that is the nature of the ego mind, in a sense, or, having control, having power. And then some of them do not enjoy that, and they don't want to, have that kind of, they don't want to be put up on a pedestal. They just want to observe and, do all those things. So it's but I really, I thought that it brought it down a little bit for me. It was like, oh, you mean they don't know who source is either? Like, they're trying to find that as well. So, and they're trying to seek a lot of their questions about the universe and God, or through us, because we can kind of, we have these imaginations. We are reaching for the stars. We are constantly asking the questions that don't get asked. Our these thoughts, these things, these that come into our heads, it's like these, are we asking the question, or are they asking us the question and we're just responding back to it? It's like, I feel like our quest for expanding that's another reason they like watching us, because we help them expand. And so it's not just them helping us. I think we help them a lot more than we are aware of. So that's just an idea too.
Yeah, it's fascinating because when we think about, oh, well, if they don't have physical bodies, then they definitely should have full access to the source and they should know exactly what it's like, but not the case. And totally not putting them on a pedestal, because then we can actually relate better, co-create better, and just have this collaboration. I love the when in the Star Wars or wherever else you see a port where the whole bunch of different beings intersect and cross over, and there's so huge, humongous differences between them, but they all peacefully intermingle. And I love that concept and idea, and I hope that someday we come to the point where we can actually interact like that without fear, without prejudice and whatnot. That would be good.
I think we'll get there one of these days. I don't know if it'll happen in our lifetime, but it
Yeah.
would be nice. When I see things like that too, I'm like, oh. But at the same time, I know that I've lived other lifetimes, or I've had other aspects of myself that do interact that way, just not here, but in other
Mm-hmm.
places for sure, because otherwise I wouldn't have the experiences that I have, like when I, have been to the various different places, because, my second or third time that I remember going up on, I think it was the second time going up on a ship, um, there were a lot of different beings, but I was very familiar with them. And then another time I was stunned because I actually went up to one and was like, do you know who I am? And it telepathically communicated with me. It's like, yeah, do you know who you are? And I'm like, where am I? And I remember looking at my hands going, okay, I'm really here. This is really weird. How long can I stay here before I snap back out of it? And but there were tons of different beings there, all interacting like just normal stuff, like it wasn't any big deal. So I know somewhere in there we do have that. We just,
Yeah,
I don't
and
know,
at
we just
least one thing in our lifetime we can do is have more of these experience through dream time or
yeah,
meditation, where we actually go to the ship and it's normal to talk about and share the
yeah,
impressions. And
yeah.
that can happen in this lifetime. We don't have to wait 1,000 years for that to change. We can go and experience those concepts and those types of experiences now. It should not be or anymore forbidden subject or forbidden place to go or activity to engage in. And at this point, there are more and more people coming forth and having, oh, I had this experience. Oh, you had it too. So the more we talk about it, the more we can start bringing it into the normal part of our life so that we can start expanding.
Normalizing it is what, and the more that people, especially with me, I mean, I don't talk about this stuff out too much because um I don't know, like I'm not, I know people probably, it would probably freak some people out, but um I think because the way I talk about it, because it is coming from such, I mean, I'm speaking from a real freaking experience. I mean, and talk with that kind of experience and authenticity, you begin to normalize it for other people, because then they begin to realize, okay, so that person's seems sane and is talking about it in this normal way. So maybe I could share my experience and this person isn't going to look at me super weird. I mean, that's why all my friends will call me or or even text me and be like, oh my gosh, only you would understand this. And I'm like, oh yeah, absolutely, yeah, oh yeah, totally. And so I feel like we are getting more and more to that place though, where it's where it's being talked about more, it's being normalized more. And I can't, like I said earlier, I can't wait to see what it's going to be like 20 years from now.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. And the light language is an aspect for me that's how I experienced that connection. I was drawing light language for as long as I can remember myself, since 2001, but I never knew what it was. And then all of a sudden, all these people started talking about star seeds, and all the books started coming out about other beings. And the name, the concept of light language came through. And like, oh, maybe that's what I'm doing. And now it's the way for me to connect to that other intelligence, other those things through my art, through the drawing and through the symbols that I draw, to bring forth this extra dimensional information that bypasses the logical side of our brain.
Hmm.
So yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I love writing. That's one of my favorite ways to express myself is through ancient writing, through light language art. And it's interesting, the more I dive into where our languages came from and kind of, written text and forgotten alphabets and undeciphered texts and, all these things, I begin to realize that, you know, like the basis, like where did we get language from? Where did we get written language from? Where did it come from? And, if we are writing and we are writing from these aspects of us that have resided in other star systems, but also, you know, uh, resided here on in ancient earth as well. Like, I mean, we're expressing this stuff, through that art. It's coming from within us. It's coming from our DNA because that information's in there. And so to me, I think that written language came from the stars because, it was taught here. Someone had to bring it here. If we were seated here, something had to bring it here. And I just find that form of communication, um, it's like saying, so much more than just what it's saying. It's this whole visceral experience that you're having when you're creating that type of art, and even when you're showing it to the world and people are witnessing it. And, you know, um, So yeah, I think that, you know, light language writing is this interconnection to our many selves. It's a connection to the multidimensional self, into the quantum realm. I mean, we are bringing through these frequencies that don't have English or whatever words, or even, you know, even words in other languages, you know. And it's because it's within us, and we're expressing that because we are still connected to those things, whether they're here on earth or outside of the solar system. And we're bringing in that knowledge and that frequency. And I just, it changed my life when I started creating that way, you know. And creating art from being in a certain frequency and allowing my most inner self to speak through that. And so yeah, I dig that connection to that a lot. And I love your stuff. I love all your codes and your cards that you're creating. I watched that live that you did. And yeah, I mean, it's awesome to see. You know, I want what we do to be what everyone does, because I think it's so important to bring through and awaken that. And we're bringing it in through, it's you know, we're bringing it in through in a newer way. Like, when I look at all these older texts, I can see like the ancient writings, right? And we're just having something resurface that was kind of there, and not the original blueprint of it, but, you know, bringing it in, and then, you know, adding to it, you know, and bringing it in a new way, and kind of up leveling and upgrading these ancient writings. So yeah, I love it. I love it.
Yeah, exactly. And when we create things like that, we don't create them to feel special or to be special or somehow be better than others. We create them so that we can share them and enhance everybody. So, as you said, if everybody did that, we would be just as happy if we could see every single person exhibit the same kind of traits and creativity and art and whatnot. But it's just us now, kind of on the frontiers of that. And hopefully, yeah, I'd love to see what's going to happen in the next 20 years. And in closing, I kind of want to mention that when nothing else makes sense, for me personally, I look out into the stars at night, and that always remains the fact that the stars are always there, and the connection to that mystery, and like the concept of being connected to something else always remains. And that is what, in our difficult moments, in the hardest times, we should look up into the stars and try to reconnect with the higher aspects of ourselves, so that we can spark that creativity that can help us day after day through our difficulties, through our challenges, because that is the number one thing that always remains. The stars are always there, even though sometimes they kind of look fake because they're so perfect.
I've had that experience too. I've had that sometimes where, you know, it's like you're looking at a constellation, and then you start seeing that various, you know, planets or stars that are within that constellation start moving. And you're like, and I'm not talking like a little wiggle, I'm talking like a left, a right, and up and a down. And you're like, wait a minute, if that's a planet, how is that moving? And so it's like, is our sky real?
I know. but,
Chicken
but
Little, the
we
sky is falling, the sky is falling.
Yeah, but as we are going through these difficult times, it just, we can find that space in our hearts. We can find that mystery within that can lead us to different viewpoints. So we can find some hope and some inspiration to continue on, and continue on in a better way than yesterday. So that's kind of the
Agreed.
message for the day.
The message for the day is hope.
Yeah, definitely. And the hope that we can create ourselves. We
Yeah.
can create our own hope for ourselves for tomorrow. So, well, thank you so much. It was such a beautiful conversation, and I hope everybody enjoyed that. And we will continue at some other point.